"You're not someone I can build a future with," she said after 7 years of dedicated service ended in a single morning. I just walked into what I thought would be another typical Tuesday at the Columbus Department of Transportation, coffee in hand, checking emails about our new bus route optimization project, when my supervisor called me into his office with that particular expression that immediately signals bad news. The city had restructured the entire transportation department during overnight budget discussions, eliminating 12 positions including mine as Municipal Transit Systems Coordinator, effective immediately. 7 years of developing route efficiency programs, managing contractor relationships, and coordinating with community groups to improve public transit access, all wrapped up in a 20-minute conversation about budget constraints and shifting municipal priorities. They handed me paperwork outlining my severance package, thanked me for my dedicated service, and walked me to my desk to collect personal items while security watched with uncomfortable expressions. I drove home in a strange mental fog, processing the sudden shift from employed professional to unemployed statistic, though something about the severance documentation seemed unusually generous for a standard budget cut termination. When I called Brooke that afternoon to share what had happened, expecting sympathy or at least basic emotional support from someone I'd been dating for 16 months, she answered the video chat from her downtown marketing office with her usual professional backdrop and immediately launched into what felt like a prepared speech about relationship expectations and future planning. I started explaining the restructuring situation, mentioning that I'd been given substantial severance and would start looking for new opportunities immediately, but she interrupted with a tone I'd never heard before, cold and calculating in ways that caught me completely off guard. She told me she'd been reconsidering our relationship anyway, that at 31 I should be more established and financially secure, and that my sudden unemployment proved her concerns about my career trajectory and long-term potential as a partner. The woman who'd spent weekends at my apartment, who'd met my parents at Christmas dinner, who'd talked about vacation plans for this summer, was systematically dismantling 16 months of shared experiences with the efficiency of a corporate downsizing meeting. She said she needed someone who could provide the stability and financial security for the future she envisioned, someone more ambitious and established at this stage of life, someone who wouldn't face sudden career setbacks that disrupted carefully laid plans. I sat there listening to her characterize my 7-year career and unexpected termination as evidence of personal failure, watching her deliver this breakup speech with the same polished confidence she used in client presentations, never once asking how I was feeling or offering any emotional support during what was obviously a difficult day. The irony was almost laughable because tucked in my briefcase was documentation of a job offer I'd received 3 days earlier, a senior transportation planning position with the state government offering a 45% salary increase, better benefits, and opportunities for advancement that far exceeded anything available at the municipal level. I'd planned to give my 2 weeks' notice on Friday, after discussing the opportunity with Brooke and finalizing details with the state HR department, turning my apparent career setback into a significant professional advancement. The severance package was unusually generous because the city wanted to avoid potential wrongful termination lawsuits, offering $185,000 plus extended healthcare benefits and job placement assistance, essentially paying me to transition smoothly into better opportunities without creating legal complications. But as I watched Brooke explain why my temporary unemployment made me unsuitable for her future plans, I realized that sharing this information would be pointless because her reaction revealed something fundamental about how she viewed relationships and what she valued in a partner. She wasn't ending things because of genuine concern about financial instability or career uncertainty. She was ending things because she'd never seen our relationship as a partnership where two people support each other through challenges and celebrate each other's successes. I was a portfolio investment that had performed poorly in her estimation, and she was cutting her losses before things got worse, protecting her own interests with the ruthless efficiency of someone who'd never truly been emotionally invested in the first place. When she finished her breakup presentation and asked if I had any questions, I simply said I understood her position and wished her well in finding what she was looking for, then ended the call and sat in my living room processing the surreal experience of losing both my job and my girlfriend in the span of 6 hours. The strangest part was that I felt more relieved than devastated. as if some nagging doubt about our compatibility had finally been resolved by her willingness to abandon ship the moment things looked uncertain, revealing priorities and character traits that probably should have concerned me much earlier in our relationship. Over the following days, as I processed both the job termination and breakup simultaneously, I started recognizing patterns in Brooke's behavior that I'd previously rationalized or overlooked entirely. She'd always been particularly interested in my salary discussions, asking detailed questions about my benefits package and advancement opportunities with an intensity that seemed beyond normal curiosity about a partner's career satisfaction. When I'd mentioned potential promotions or new projects, her enthusiasm was always proportional to the financial implications rather than my actual interest in the work itself, celebrating raises more enthusiastically than professional achievements that didn't come with immediate monetary rewards. During our 16 months together, she'd frequently steered conversations toward my long-term earning potential, asking about my 5-year career plan with the focused attention of someone evaluating investment opportunities rather than someone interested in my personal happiness and fulfillment. Her social media posts often featured subtle mentions of my job title and workplace, particularly when introducing me to her college friends, using my career credentials as social currency in ways that felt performative rather than genuinely proud. The more I reflected on these patterns, the more I understood that her breakup speech wasn't an impulsive reaction to unexpected news, but rather the logical conclusion of an assessment process that had been ongoing throughout our relationship, with my sudden unemployment simply providing convenient justification for a decision she'd probably been considering for weeks or months. She'd been evaluating our relationship through a purely transactional lens, measuring my value as a partner against metrics like career stability, earning potential, and social status rather than considering qualities like compatibility, emotional connection, or shared values that actually determine long-term relationship success. The 6-week gap between my termination and starting the new state position gave me an unexpected opportunity to reassess my entire life situation, beginning with the substantial severance package that most people never receive after losing their jobs. I contacted my college roommate Derek, who'd built a successful financial planning practice in Cincinnati, to discuss investment strategies for the $185,000 I'd received, explaining that I wanted to maximize this windfall rather than simply letting it sit in a checking account earning minimal interest. Derek suggested an aggressive debt elimination approach followed by diversified investing, pointing out that clearing my existing obligations would improve my financial foundation significantly while the remaining funds could generate long-term growth through carefully selected mutual funds and index investments. I paid off my student loans immediately, eliminating $22,000 in debt that had been costing me $347 monthly for the past 8 years, then cleared my credit card balance of $11,000 that had accumulated from various home improvements and vacation expenses over the previous 2 years. With those obligations eliminated, I suddenly had over $550 more in monthly cash flow, while the remaining severance funds went into a diversified portfolio that Derek helped me structure based on my age, risk tolerance, and long-term financial goals. The psychological impact of becoming completely debt-free was more significant than I'd anticipated, creating a sense of financial freedom and security that I'd never experienced since graduating college and entering the workforce with substantial loan obligations. During this transitional period, I also addressed the work burnout that I'd been ignoring for months, recognizing that my previous job had become increasingly stressful due to budget constraints, political pressures, and unrealistic project timelines that had left me feeling drained and professionally unfulfilled. I started rock climbing at a local gym, something I'd considered for years but never prioritized due to work commitments and relationship obligations that had consumed most of my free time and discretionary income. The physical challenge and mental focus required for climbing provided a perfect outlet for stress while building confidence and connecting me with a community of people who shared similar interests in outdoor activities and personal challenges. I enrolled in weekend photography classes at the community college, finally pursuing a creative interest that had been relegated to occasional smartphone snapshots due to my previous schedule constraints and financial priorities. Learning about composition, lighting, and technical camera settings gave me a new perspective on my surroundings while providing a meditative hobby that encouraged exploration of Columbus neighborhoods and natural areas I'd previously overlooked. I also decided to learn Italian cooking, purchasing quality ingredients and spending hours experimenting with traditional recipes, finding genuine satisfaction in creating something tangible and delicious after years of abstract project management and bureaucratic problem-solving in my transportation role. These activities filled my days with purposeful engagement while allowing me to recover from the chronic stress and emotional exhaustion that had built up over years of demanding work environments and an increasingly unsatisfying romantic relationship. Meanwhile, several of Brooke's college friends reached out privately through social media messages, expressing concern about her version of our breakup and sharing information that revealed disturbing patterns in her post-relationship narrative. Her roommate Amanda sent me a careful message explaining that Brooke had been telling people I was financially unstable and irresponsible with money, characterizing my termination as evidence of poor career planning rather than acknowledging the municipal budget cuts that affected multiple departments citywide. Another mutual friend mentioned that Brooke had described our relationship as emotionally draining, claiming she'd had to constantly support me through career insecurities and financial anxieties that didn't align with any reality I remembered from our time together. These revelations confirmed my growing suspicion that Brooke had been crafting a revisionist history of our relationship that positioned her as the long-suffering partner who'd finally escaped an inadequate boyfriend, rather than acknowledging her own role in creating a dynamic where my worth was measured primarily through earning potential and career status rather than personal compatibility or emotional connection. The most telling conversation came from Jessica, a friend from Brooke's graduate program, who mentioned that Brooke had been complaining about my lack of ambition for months before the termination, describing me as someone who was content with mediocrity and didn't share her vision for upward mobility and professional advancement. According to Jessica, Brooke had been particularly critical of my decision to stay with municipal government rather than pursuing private sector opportunities that might offer higher salaries and more prestigious titles, viewing my job satisfaction and work-life balance as evidence of limited drive rather than healthy priorities. She'd apparently told multiple friends that she was concerned about my long-term earning potential and wondered whether I had the ambition necessary to support the lifestyle she wanted to build in her 30s and beyond. What struck me as particularly manipulative was her tendency to frame these concerns as relationship incompatibility rather than simply acknowledging that she wanted a wealthier partner, using language about emotional maturity and life goals to disguise what were essentially materialistic preferences and social climbing aspirations. During this period of reflection and personal growth, I also began to appreciate the freedom that came from not having to justify my choices to someone who fundamentally disagreed with my values and priorities. For the first time in over a year, I could make decisions about money, time, and career without considering whether they would meet Brooke's approval or fit into her vision of what our relationship should look like financially and professionally. I realized that I'd been unconsciously modifying my behavior and suppressing my own interests to accommodate her expectations, prioritizing restaurant choices, vacation destinations, and weekend activities based on her preferences rather than finding genuine compromise or taking turns choosing experiences we'd both enjoy. The photography classes introduced me to a creative community that valued artistic expression and technical skill over income levels or professional status, providing social connections based on shared interests rather than networking opportunities or social positioning. Similarly, the rock climbing gym attracted people from diverse professional backgrounds who bonded over physical challenges and outdoor adventures, creating friendships that weren't influenced by career hierarchies or earning comparisons that had seemed to dominate Brooke's social circle. These new activities and relationships reminded me that genuine compatibility comes from shared values, complementary personalities, and mutual respect rather than matching financial goals or social ambitions that can change over time based on external circumstances. The encounter that changed everything happened on a Saturday morning at the North Market Farmers Market, where I'd gone to buy ingredients for a new Italian dish I wanted to attempt after watching a cooking tutorial online the night before. I was examining heirloom tomatoes at one of the vendors' stalls, comparing varieties and asking the farmer about optimal ripeness indicators, when I noticed someone watching me from across the walkway with an expression of complete shock and disbelief. Brooke was standing near the artisanal bread booth with her roommate Amanda, both of them staring in my direction with obvious surprise, though Brooke's face showed something closer to confusion mixed with what looked like genuine dismay. I'd parked my newly purchased certified pre-owned BMW X3 in the adjacent lot, a vehicle I'd bought with cash from my severance planning after researching reliability ratings, resale values, and maintenance costs to ensure it was a practical long-term investment rather than an impulsive luxury purchase. The metallic gray SUV represented exactly the kind of thoughtful financial decision that Derek had encouraged, combining quality engineering with reasonable depreciation rates while providing the cargo space and all-weather capability I wanted for weekend photography trips and outdoor activities. When Brooke approached my vehicle after I'd loaded my market purchases into the back, her entire demeanor had shifted from casual Saturday morning shopping to intense curiosity mixed with barely concealed calculation, studying the BMW's premium features and current year styling with the focused attention of someone reassessing a previously dismissed investment opportunity. She commented on how impressive the vehicle looked and asked about my current situation with transparent interest that felt more like an interrogation than friendly conversation, probing for information about how I'd managed to afford such a purchase while supposedly dealing with unemployment and financial instability. I explained about the new state government position briefly, mentioning that it came with significantly better compensation and benefits than my previous municipal role, along with opportunities for advancement that hadn't existed in the city's constrained budget environment. Her reaction was immediate and dramatic, shifting from skeptical curiosity to obvious regret as she processed the implications of what I'd shared, realizing that her assessment of my career prospects had been completely incorrect and that her decision to end our relationship had been based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about my professional trajectory and earning potential. The transformation in her behavior was remarkable to witness, going from polite distance to calculated charm within the span of a single conversation, suddenly remembering shared experiences and inside jokes that she dismissed as irrelevant just weeks earlier when explaining why we weren't compatible for long-term partnership. She suggested that we reconnect over brunch sometime soon, claiming that she'd always believed in fresh starts for people who matter and reaching for my hand with the familiar manipulative smile that I now recognized as a practice tool for getting what she wanted from men who were susceptible to her physical attractiveness and feigned emotional vulnerability. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming because I could see exactly what was happening from her perspective, watching her mental calculations as she weighed the potential benefits of rekindling our relationship against the social embarrassment of admitting she'd made a mistake in ending things so abruptly and cruelly. Her roommate Amanda stood awkwardly nearby during this entire interaction, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing Brooke's obvious attempt to manipulate me back into a relationship that she'd discarded without hesitation when it no longer served her perceived interests, occasionally glancing between us with expressions that suggested she was seeing a side of her friend that made her genuinely uncomfortable. I responded to Brooke's overtures with polite but distant courtesy, acknowledging her suggestions about reconnecting while making it clear through my body language and tone that I wasn't interested in revisiting a relationship with someone who'd revealed such fundamental character flaws during our breakup conversation. The contrast between her current behavior and her previous coldness was so stark that it felt like watching a completely different person, someone who was willing to set aside pride and dignity in pursuit of financial security and social status that she'd apparently realized she'd given up prematurely. When she mentioned believing in fresh starts for people who matter, I almost laughed at the transparent implication that my employment status had somehow changed my worth as a person, as if the same qualities that had made me unsuitable for her future plans had magically transformed simply because my paycheck was larger and more secure. Her assumption that I would be grateful for another chance with her, despite the humiliating way she'd ended our relationship, revealed a level of entitlement and self-importance that I found both amusing and deeply unattractive, confirming that my initial relief about our breakup had been completely justified by subsequent events and revelations. The entire encounter felt surreal because I was watching someone desperately trying to undo a decision that had seemed so final and definitive just weeks earlier, suddenly realizing that her cost-benefit analysis had been flawed and that she discarded something valuable based on incomplete information and short-sighted thinking. What made the situation even more uncomfortable was her apparent belief that I would simply overlook the cruel and dismissive way she'd treated me during our breakup, as if the emotional damage could be erased by her renewed interest now that my financial prospects had improved dramatically. She kept mentioning how good I looked, commenting on my apparent confidence and success in ways that felt like she was trying to convince herself as much as me that we could simply pick up where we'd left off before her character assassination. The conversation revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of how relationships work, assuming that compatibility and trust could be restored simply because external circumstances had changed, without addressing the underlying issues that had led to our incompatibility in the first place. I found myself studying her behavior with the same analytical mindset I developed in my transportation planning work, recognizing patterns and motivations that would have been invisible to me during our relationship when I was emotionally invested in maintaining her approval and affection. Her body language, tone of voice, and choice of words all indicated someone who was operating from desperation rather than genuine feelings, trying to regain access to resources and opportunities that she'd voluntarily forfeited through poor decision-making and character flaws. The most telling moment came when she asked about my new position's advancement opportunities and benefit package, questions that revealed her continued focus on financial considerations rather than personal compatibility or emotional connection, proving that her fundamental priorities hadn't changed despite her apparent regret about ending our relationship. When I politely declined her suggestion about brunch and mentioned that I needed to get home to prepare for a photography workshop, her expression shifted again from hopeful manipulation to frustrated disappointment, clearly struggling to process my lack of enthusiasm for her renewed attention and interest. 3 weeks into my excellent new position at the Ohio Department of Transportation, where I was already making significant contributions to statewide transit planning initiatives and earning recognition from senior management for my analytical skills and project coordination abilities, Brooke launched what could only be described as an aggressive reconnection campaign that revealed the depths of her desperation and manipulation tactics. The first wave came through late-night text messages that started arriving around midnight, carefully crafted to sound remorseful and emotionally vulnerable while subtly emphasizing her regret about losing our connection and her newfound appreciation for my qualities as a partner. These messages typically began with expressions of missing specific memories we'd shared, like weekend cooking experiments or hiking trips, before transitioning into broader statements about how she'd been reflecting on our relationship and realizing that she'd made a terrible mistake in ending things so abruptly without considering the emotional bond we'd developed over 16 months together. When I didn't respond to her initial attempts at text-based reconciliation, she escalated to showing up at locations where she knew I might be found during my lunch breaks, somehow discovering my routine through social media investigation or mutual contacts who weren't aware of the problematic nature of our breakup. I would emerge from the state office building at noon to find her conveniently walking past with coffee and a hopeful expression, acting surprised to encounter me while clearly having planned these meetings to create opportunities for face-to-face conversation that I couldn't easily avoid without being rude in public settings. Her approach during these encounters was consistently manipulative, combining apparent vulnerability with subtle guilt tactics designed to make me feel responsible for her emotional distress and current life difficulties, which she described in ways that implied my absence was causing significant problems in her personal and professional development. She would mention struggling with work projects that reminded her of conversations we'd had about career planning, or feeling lonely during weekend activities that we'd previously enjoyed together, creating a narrative where my decision to maintain distance was somehow cruel and unreasonable given our shared history and emotional investment. The situation reached a concerning peak when she appeared uninvited at my department's retirement party for Harold, a longtime colleague who was celebrating 40 years of public service with the state transportation system, held at a downtown restaurant that she couldn't have known about without significant research into my workplace activities and schedule. She introduced herself to my new coworkers as my ex-girlfriend who was trying to work things out, engaging them in conversations about our relationship history and expressing hope that we could resolve our differences through better communication and mutual understanding. The embarrassment of having to ask her to leave while my colleagues watched was significant, but necessary to establish clear boundaries and protect my professional reputation from her inappropriate boundary violations and manipulative behavior patterns. Her justification for attending a private workplace event where she wasn't invited revealed a disturbing sense of entitlement and complete disregard for appropriate social boundaries, claiming that she was simply trying to support someone she cared about during important life moments. Following the retirement party incident, Her communication pattern shifted to alternating between apologetic messages and accusatory ones, creating an emotional roller coaster designed to keep me engaged through confusion and guilt rather than genuine connection or respect for my clearly stated preferences. The apologetic messages typically arrived during business hours, expressing shame about her recent behavior while promising to respect my boundaries and give me space to process my feelings without pressure or manipulation from her regarding our potential future together. The accusatory messages usually came late at night or early in the morning, questioning my motives for maintaining distance and suggesting that my unwillingness to communicate indicated emotional immaturity or inability to handle adult relationships with complexity and nuance. These contradictory communication styles revealed someone who was struggling to maintain consistent manipulation strategies, cycling through different emotional appeals and pressure tactics without any genuine insight into why her behavior was problematic or how it was affecting my ability to move forward with my life and career goals. The most bizarre incident occurred when she left a rambling voicemail message that she'd apparently recorded while standing outside the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date, wondering aloud why I wouldn't give our love another chance and describing her memories of that evening as evidence that we shared something special that shouldn't be discarded over temporary misunderstandings about career priorities and life goals. This voicemail revealed not only her continued romanticizing of our relationship but also her willingness to engage in stalking behavior that demonstrated complete disconnection from reality regarding my feelings and intentions, treating our past connection as if it were some kind of binding contract that prevented me from making independent decisions about my romantic future. The frequency and intensity of these contact attempts increased rather than decreased over time, suggesting that my consistent non-response was somehow encouraging her persistence rather than communicating my clear disinterest in rekindling our relationship under any circumstances. Her behavior patterns reminded me of case studies I'd read about individuals who struggle with rejection and abandonment, unable to accept that relationships can end definitively and that attempts to force reconciliation often push the other person further away rather than creating opportunities for genuine connection and mutual understanding. What made her campaign particularly troubling was the calculated nature of her approach, combining emotional manipulation with strategic timing and location choices that suggested significant planning and premeditation rather than impulsive reactions to missing our relationship. She seemed to be operating from a playbook of reconciliation tactics, trying different emotional appeals and pressure strategies when previous attempts failed to generate the response she wanted, escalating her efforts rather than respecting my clearly communicated boundaries and preferences. The contrast between her current desperate pursuit and her previous cold dismissal created a surreal dynamic where I was watching someone completely reverse their assessment of my worth based solely on changed financial circumstances, without any acknowledgement of the emotional damage she'd caused or the character flaws she'd revealed through her original breakup approach. Her inability to accept my lack of interest revealed someone who had never truly understood consent and mutual respect as fundamental requirements for healthy relationships, instead viewing romantic connections as negotiations where sufficient pressure and manipulation could achieve desired outcomes regardless of the other person's authentic feelings. Brooke's behavior crossed into genuinely concerning territory when she began parking outside my apartment complex for extended periods, sitting in her car for hours at a time while claiming to building security that she was visiting friends whenever they approached to investigate her presence in the visitor parking area. When security asked her to identify which specific residence she was visiting, she became evasive and defensive, unable to provide names or apartment numbers that would justify her prolonged stays in areas clearly designated for short-term guest parking only. Her explanations became increasingly elaborate and contradictory, sometimes claiming she was waiting for a friend who was running late, other times insisting she had every right to park there as long as she wasn't bothering anyone or violating specific time restrictions posted in the parking regulations. The security staff began documenting these incidents after multiple residents complained about a suspicious vehicle that appeared regularly without any apparent legitimate purpose, creating a pattern of behavior that clearly qualified as stalking rather than coincidental presence in my neighborhood. The situation escalated when she discovered my monthly board game night with college friends, an informal gathering that rotated between different apartments and had been a consistent part of my social routine for over 3 years before I'd even met her during our previous relationship. She appeared at my door on a Thursday evening carrying wine and snacks, acting as if she was still welcome in my social circle and completely ignoring the obvious discomfort of my friends who had witnessed our relationship dynamics and were aware of how our breakup had unfolded several months earlier. When I asked her to leave, she argued with my confused friends, trying to convince them that my resistance was based on stubborn pride rather than legitimate concerns about her behavior, appealing to their sense of fairness and suggesting that everyone deserved second chances for honest mistakes in judgment. My friends, particularly Derek, who had helped me with financial planning, were uncomfortable with her manipulation tactics and supported my request for her to leave, but the entire incident created an awkward dynamic that disrupted what had previously been a relaxed and enjoyable evening of games and conversation. Her inability to respect the boundaries of my personal relationships revealed someone who viewed other people as obstacles to overcome rather than individuals with their own rights to make decisions about who they wanted to include in their social activities and personal spaces. The most concerning incident occurred when she visited my workplace at the Ohio Department of Transportation, attempting to deliver homemade lunch to celebrate my career success and requiring security intervention when reception staff refused her access to the employee areas without proper authorization or advance arrangements. She had somehow obtained detailed information about my work schedule and office location, suggesting extensive research into my professional activities that went far beyond casual interest in my well-being and career development. When security asked her to leave, she became argumentative and emotional, insisting that she was simply trying to support someone she cared about and that her intentions were purely positive and romantic rather than intrusive or inappropriate. The incident required documentation in building security reports and notification to my supervisor, creating potential complications for my professional reputation and workplace relationships that were completely unnecessary and avoidable if she had respected basic social boundaries and professional etiquette. Her justification texts afterward were particularly disturbing, claiming she was fighting for our future and that my resistance was just stubborn pride preventing our destined reconciliation, language that revealed a complete disconnection from reality regarding my feelings and the nature of our terminated relationship. These messages demonstrated her belief that persistence and romantic gestures would eventually overcome my resistance, operating from assumptions about love and relationships that were fundamentally unhealthy and based on manipulation rather than mutual respect and genuine connection. The pattern of escalating behavior suggested someone who was unable to process rejection in healthy ways, instead interpreting my boundaries as challenges to overcome rather than legitimate expressions of my preferences and feelings about our compatibility and relationship potential. Her references to destiny and fighting for our future revealed grandiose thinking that placed her desires above my clearly stated preferences, treating my autonomy and decision-making ability as temporary obstacles rather than fundamental rights that needed to be respected regardless of her emotional investment in different outcomes. The workplace incident was particularly problematic because it demonstrated her willingness to potentially damage my professional relationships and reputation in pursuit of personal goals, showing a level of selfishness and poor judgment that confirmed my decision to maintain distance had been absolutely correct and necessary for my well-being and future success. What made these incidents even more disturbing was how she seemed to interpret my professional success as validation that she had made a mistake in ending our relationship, rather than recognizing that my career advancement had nothing to do with our fundamental incompatibility and the character flaws she had revealed during our breakup conversation. Her messages often referenced my new salary and benefits package in ways that suggested she viewed my financial improvement as an opportunity for her rather than an achievement that belonged to me personally, reinforcing my understanding that her interest in reconciliation was primarily motivated by material considerations rather than genuine emotional connection or personal growth. The contrast between her current pursuit behavior and her previous dismissive attitude created a surreal dynamic where I was watching someone completely reverse their assessment of my worth based solely on external circumstances, without any acknowledgement of the emotional damage she had caused or any genuine understanding of why her original behavior had been so hurtful and revealing. Her inability to comprehend that successful relationships require mutual respect, emotional maturity, and shared values rather than just financial compatibility demonstrated that she had learned nothing from our breakup experience and was simply repeating the same transactional approach to relationships that had created problems in the first place. The most troubling aspect of her campaign was how she seemed to believe that romantic persistence was inherently admirable and that my resistance indicated some kind of character flaw or emotional immaturity on my part, rather than recognizing that healthy relationships require enthusiastic mutual consent and that attempting to force connection through pressure and manipulation is fundamentally unethical and destructive. Her references to fighting for our love and not giving up on what we had revealed someone who romanticized unhealthy relationship dynamics and viewed persistence in the face of clear rejection as evidence of deep commitment rather than concerning boundary violations that demonstrated poor judgment and lack of respect for other people's autonomy and decision-making rights. After consulting with Marcus, a college friend who worked in the Franklin County District Attorney's office and had experience with harassment cases, I decided to pursue legal intervention through a restraining order based on extensive documentation I'd been keeping of Brooke's unwanted contact attempts and escalating boundary violations over the previous 2 months. Marcus recommended a family law attorney named Sarah Chin who specialized in protective orders and had successfully handled similar cases involving ex-partners who couldn't accept relationship terminations and escalated to stalking behavior that interfered with work, housing, and personal safety. I spent several hours organizing text message screenshots, building security reports, witness statements from coworkers who had observed the workplace incident, and detailed logs of every unwanted contact attempt, creating a comprehensive record that demonstrated clear patterns of harassment rather than isolated incidents that could be dismissed as misunderstandings or coincidental encounters. The documentation revealed disturbing escalation patterns that even I hadn't fully recognized while experiencing them individually, showing how Brooke's behavior had progressed from emotional manipulation through social boundary violations to workplace interference and persistent surveillance of my daily activities and routines. When we filed the petition at Franklin County Family Court, I felt a combination of relief and anxiety about taking formal legal action against someone I'd once cared about, but Marcus assured me that protecting myself from harassment was not only reasonable but necessary to prevent further escalation that could potentially affect my career, housing situation, and mental health. The court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, giving Brooke time to respond to the petition and potentially seek legal representation, though Marcus warned me that many people in her situation either ignored the proceedings entirely or appeared without understanding the serious legal implications of restraining order violations. On the hearing date, Brooke arrived with her mother and a public defender she'd apparently contacted after receiving the court summons, looking nervous and defensive as they sat across the courtroom while we waited for Judge Patricia Williams to review the case file and hear testimony from both parties. When called forward, Brooke attempted to characterize her actions as normal post-breakup communication between two people who had shared genuine feelings and meaningful experiences over 16 months of dating, claiming that I was exaggerating isolated incidents and misinterpreting her intentions as malicious when they were actually motivated by love and concern for my well-being. Her public defender tried to frame the situation as a misunderstanding between former partners who needed better communication rather than legal intervention, suggesting that the court's time would be better spent encouraging us to resolve our differences through mediation or counseling rather than imposing restrictive orders that could affect her employment and housing opportunities. However, Judge Williams was clearly experienced with these types of cases and focused on the documented evidence rather than emotional appeals, reviewing the text message screenshots that showed escalating demands for contact, the building security reports that confirmed unauthorized presence at my residence, and witness statements from my coworkers describing the workplace incident that had required security intervention. The judge asked specific questions about the timeline of incidents, the nature of our relationship termination, and whether I had clearly communicated my desire for no contact, all of which were supported by the comprehensive documentation that Marcus had helped me organize and present effectively. When Judge Williams asked Brooke directly whether she understood that I had requested no further contact and whether she had respected those boundaries, her response revealed the fundamental disconnect from reality that had driven her behavior, as she claimed that relationships were complicated and that people sometimes needed time to work through their feelings before making permanent decisions about their future together. Her answer demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking that made the restraining order necessary, showing that she viewed my clearly stated boundaries as temporary obstacles rather than legitimate expressions of my preferences that needed to be respected regardless of her own desires and emotional investment in different outcomes. Judge Williams granted a 1-year protection order requiring Brooke to maintain 300 feet distance from my residence, workplace, and any locations where I was present, with violations subject to immediate arrest and potential criminal charges that could result in jail time and permanent criminal records. Brooke's emotional breakdown in court was dramatic and concerning, including her declaration that I was destroying what we had out of spite rather than genuine safety concerns, revealing her continued inability to understand that restraining orders are protective measures rather than punishment for past relationships or personal disagreements between former partners. Her mother's reaction was equally problematic as she confronted me outside the courthouse after the hearing, blaming me for breaking her daughter's heart when she was simply trying to love me and suggesting that I was being cruel and vindictive by involving the legal system in what should have been a private matter between two adults. The mother's intervention demonstrated where Brooke had learned some of her manipulative behaviors and boundary-crossing tendencies, as she seemed to share her daughter's belief that persistence in the face of rejection was romantic rather than concerning, and that my legal action was somehow an overreaction to normal relationship difficulties that could be resolved through communication and compromise. I explained politely but firmly that the restraining order was necessary because her daughter had refused to respect my clearly stated boundaries and had escalated to behavior that interfered with my work, housing, and personal safety, but the mother continued to characterize Brooke's actions as evidence of deep love rather than problematic harassment that had required legal intervention to stop. The entire courthouse experience reinforced my understanding that Brooke's issues with boundaries and consent were not individual character flaws but rather patterns learned from family dynamics where emotional manipulation and persistent pursuit were normalized as acceptable ways to handle relationship conflicts and rejection. Marcus later explained that family members often struggle to accept restraining orders against their relatives because they view the legal intervention as criticism of their parenting or family values, rather than understanding that some behaviors require external consequences regardless of the underlying motivations or family history that contributed to their development. The restraining order provided immediate relief and peace of mind, knowing that any further contact attempts would result in criminal charges and that I had legal recourse if Brooke continued to violate my boundaries or interfere with my life and career in any way. Judge Williams had been professional and thorough throughout the hearing, focusing on facts and documented evidence rather than emotional appeals, which gave me confidence that the legal system could provide effective protection when people refused to respect basic social boundaries and continued escalating problematic behavior despite clear communication. With the restraining order providing legal protection, I experienced genuine relief and began focusing on building a positive future that I'd never been able to pursue while managing Brooke's constant demands and emotional manipulation throughout our relationship. The freedom from harassment allowed me to fully appreciate my new position with the State Transportation Department, where I was already earning recognition for developing innovative transit solutions and building strong working relationships with colleagues who respected my analytical skills and collaborative approach to complex infrastructure challenges. I started dating Alexis Chen, a veterinary technician who showed interest in my creative pursuits rather than evaluating my worth through salary calculations or career advancement potential that might benefit her lifestyle expectations. Our relationship developed naturally around shared interests like hiking and photography, creating a balanced partnership where both people contributed equally without financial pressure or social status considerations that had dominated my interactions with Brooke throughout our 16 months together. When I mentioned receiving a promotion to senior coordinator within 8 months of starting the position, Alexis's reaction was purely celebratory, expressing genuine pride in my achievement without immediately asking about salary increases or benefit improvements that would affect her personal financial situation. The contrast with Brooke was remarkable because I'd found someone who actually listened when I discussed work projects and asked thoughtful questions about transportation planning without viewing my career advancement as an opportunity for personal financial gain or social status elevation among her friends and family. Alexis had her own established career working with animals at a large veterinary practice, her own apartment that she'd chosen for its proximity to hiking trails, and her own financial independence that created the kind of relationship dynamic where neither person felt responsible for supporting the other's lifestyle choices or material aspirations. Our weekend activities reflected shared values about work-life balance and outdoor recreation that made spending time together genuinely enjoyable rather than performative or calculated to achieve specific social or financial objectives that had characterized my previous relationship experiences with someone who viewed dating as strategic networking. My career flourished with increased responsibilities coordinating regional transportation initiatives, managing larger budgets for infrastructure improvements, and representing Ohio at conferences where I presented research on sustainable mobility solutions that were being implemented throughout the Midwest. The investment portfolio that Derek had helped me structure with my severance funds grew substantially as market conditions improved, providing financial security and peace of mind that came from sound planning and diversified risk management rather than depending on others to provide stability and support through relationship arrangements. Most importantly, the entire experience taught me fundamental lessons about genuine partnership and personal boundaries, helping me understand that healthy relationships require supporting each other through difficulties rather than abandoning ship when circumstances become challenging or uncertain. Someone who only values you during periods of success and financial stability was never truly invested in you as a person, but rather viewed the relationship as a portfolio investment that could be liquidated when performance didn't meet their expectations or when better opportunities became available elsewhere. I had learned to maintain strong personal boundaries and self-respect while building healthier relationships based on mutual appreciation, shared values, and emotional connection rather than transactional benefits or social status considerations that could change based on external circumstances beyond anyone's control, creating the foundation for genuine long-term compatibility and happiness. Through mutual friends, I eventually learned that Brooke had moved to a different city about 6 months after the court hearing, apparently seeking a fresh start somewhere that didn't include constant reminders of her poor decisions and the relationship opportunities she'd destroyed through her materialistic priorities and boundary-crossing behavior that had ultimately required legal intervention to stop. I genuinely hoped she had used the geographic relocation as an opportunity for personal growth and self-reflection, learning to value emotional compatibility and mutual respect rather than simply seeking partners who could provide financial security and social status elevation through their career achievements and earning potential. My relationship with Alexis continued developing beautifully throughout the following year, built on foundations of trust, shared interests, and genuine appreciation for each other's personalities and goals rather than calculations about financial benefits or social networking opportunities that might result from our partnership. We'd started discussing long-term plans together, not because of external pressures or financial calculations, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company and wanted to continue building a life that incorporated both of our dreams and aspirations in ways that felt natural and mutually supportive rather than competitive or transactional. The contrast between my current relationship satisfaction and the anxiety I'd experienced during my final months with Brooke confirmed that choosing compatibility and character over superficial attraction and social positioning had been absolutely the right decision for my long-term happiness and personal development as someone who valued genuine connection over material benefits. Looking back on the entire experience, I felt grateful that Brooke had revealed her true character so clearly during our breakup conversation, saving me years of trying to build a future with someone who would have continued viewing our relationship through a purely materialistic lens rather than developing genuine emotional intimacy and mutual support that characterized healthy partnerships between people who shared compatible values and life goals.